bring in Joe Thomas, the future Hall of Famer, NFL Network analyst, former Browns offensive tackle, all-pro, kind enough to join us. Joe, let's go back to when Baker Mayfield and his agent put out that letter, that love letter to Cleveland, that it's time for me to leave, basically. What did you make of that move by Baker Mayfield?
Well, the first thing that I saw, it seemed like he wanted to express gratitude to the fans, because even in the situation that we're sitting in right now, where Baker Mayfield is about to be traded to another team, there's a lot of defenders of Baker. There's a lot of fans of Baker for what he did for this franchise. I mean, my last 2 years in Cleveland, we won one game. The next year we draft Baker Mayfield, and he's been part of this turnaround, including winning a playoff game against their hated rival, the Pittsburgh Steelers. So certainly there's a lot of love still in Cleveland from a big section of the fan base for Baker. So I think he wanted to express gratitude, but there was also a little hidden meaning in there. I think he was trying to make sure he could be a little bit passive aggressive with the team, trying to make them make a decision so that he could either have them fall back in love with him and really open their arms up and wrap themselves around Baker, or kind of start the process of getting him traded to somewhere he wanted to go. And it turns out that he wanted to go to the Indianapolis Colts.
Well, I just wonder if that strategy, by being so vocal or pushing the envelope a little bit here, that the Browns weren't going to get Deshaun Watson. At least that was the report. And then they made an offer that he couldn't refuse. Even if he didn't want to play in Cleveland or in that weather, he wanted to play in a dome. It felt like he exacerbated this, that maybe he talked himself out of town and Cleveland had no choice but to go all in on Deshaun Watson. What do you make of that strategy?
I think that will be, when it's all said and done, the highlight of the Baker Mayfield era in Cleveland, where he was just a little bit too boisterous, just a little bit too cocky, just talked a little bit too much. And that ended up being the reason why the Browns moved on from him. Because let's be honest, he hasn't played bad enough where you have to dump him. It was the combination of his prickliness, the comments that he's made throughout his career, throwing teammates under the bus, the coaching staff, the trainers, the media, getting in little fights with the media all the time. It was all those things, and kind of showing a propensity to being emotional and sensitive and not being able to handle the criticism all the times, not only in the media, in social media, but also I think inside those meeting rooms in Cleveland. And I think when you have a front office made up of Andrew Berry, Paul DePodesta, and then a head coach with Kevin Stefanski, who are extremely unemotional, extremely calculated and robotic and by the book and analytical, like it's just not a great fit when you have that type of a personality that's trying to fit into a much more structured and unemotional, calculated decision-making box.
Do you like this move, getting Deshaun Watson?
From a football standpoint, it's a no-brainer. I mean, Deshaun Watson is a bona fide tier one franchise quarterback. You could argue maybe that like an Aaron Rodgers, if he would have been available, would be a better quarterback tomorrow. But there's no argument as far as long-term answer at quarterback that Deshaun Watson has been the best one available in the NFL in quite some time, because not only his performance, but his continued upside. We haven't seen him, I think, reach his ceiling as a quarterback, and he's a young player. So I think he fits with what today's NFL version of a quarterback looks like, as far as a guy who can throw the football a mile. He can be accurate. He can also get outside the pocket and beat you with his legs, whether that means running outside the pocket and throwing, or running outside the pocket and making plays down the field running the football. I think I'm withholding my final judgment a little bit on everything that I'm seeing, because there's obviously those 22 sexual assault allegations that are still out there, the sexual misconduct allegations. And there's still a lot that we who have not been involved in the investigation are, I think, going to find out about down the line. And I think it's important for us as fans maybe to not pass judgment right away, even though that's what we want to do, especially me in sports media, right? What are we supposed to do? You always got to take a stand. But I think in this case, it's important to maybe be a little bit more measured and allow some more of the information to come out before we maybe make a judgment call on the totality of this decision by the Browns.
I said this, I've been saying it. Why not reach out to this attorney representing these women? If you're the Browns, why? I mean, don't tell me you did your background check and your due diligence, when that's where I start. and my thought is the Browns, maybe they don't want to know. Like maybe you're already in. I mean, he's there. He's your guy. So there's not much you can do. No takebacks here. But I would have reached out to the attorney just to say, we're thinking of trading for him. What can you tell us? And nobody reached out to this attorney representing these women. I find that mind-boggling.
Yeah, I think what the Browns had said about it is they were trying to keep the pursuit of Watson as quiet as possible, and that they knew if they reached out to the plaintiff's attorney, that the plaintiff was going to try to use that as some type of a leverage situation against Deshaun in the civil litigation. And the plaintiff attorney, he's kind of got a history of flair and trying to be dramatic and get his name out in the media. And so maybe they didn't want that circus. And they also felt this is not something that they said. The second part, the first part is what they said. They said, hey, they wanted to keep it quiet. The second part is just my own analysis of the situation is, hey, he's a plaintiff attorney for a reason. Like, what do you think he's going to tell you? You think he's going to say, yeah, Deshaun's innocent? Like, he's going to try to paint as terrible of a picture as possible because his job is to try to maximize the leverage that he can get money for those women that he's representing. Now, with that being said, if it was me, it doesn't hurt to just ask the question, right? What's the downside of hearing the worst case scenario from the plaintiff's attorney, which obviously that's what you're going to get. You're going to get a tremendous amount of bias because that's his job.
Yeah, and the Browns are going to be paying this civil lawsuit because of all that guaranteed money and the raise they gave Deshaun Watson. So indirectly, they're going to be paying for whatever settlement there's going to be. I was curious your thoughts on Matt Ryan going to the Colts. I love the move, but also when teams say, hey, we're just kind of talking to Deshaun Watson, hold on here, we still love you. And then I love that Matt Ryan said, no, it doesn't work that way, guys. I've given you my career here. I was an MVP here. We went to a Super Bowl here. You want Deshaun Watson? Great. If you don't get him, I want someplace else. So the Colts end up with Matt Ryan. Your thoughts?
I think it's a great decision for the Colts, right? They're a team that's built to win now, a little bit kind of like the Browns are, right? They've got a good defense. They've got a very good offensive line. They've got one of the best running games in the NFL. They can throw the football if the quarterback's making the right decisions, which at times Carson Wentz was pretty good, and they won when that happened. And so I think if you bring in a veteran quarterback who maybe is not the player he was 5 years ago, but he can still make the right decisions, he's not going to put his team in a bad situation. They feel that they've got a really good running game. They've got a good enough team built around that quarterback position that as long as Matt Ryan doesn't make the type of mistakes in critical moments that Carson Wentz did, that's going to be a big upgrade. And I also still think Matt Ryan can still throw the football. He's not going to get outside the pocket, which limits them a little bit what they can do offensively. But Matt Ryan is still a really good quarterback in the NFL, and I think he's a great placeholder potentially for them drafting somebody this year or maybe next year when there's possibly a few more quarterbacks available in the draft.
This transfer portal with the NFL, there's not many seats left in the game of musical chairs. So where does Baker Mayfield end up?
Well, it's getting tough for Baker Mayfield. And I think listening to the people in Cleveland, I still got a lot of friends there, got a house there, listening to sports radio. There's a lot of people that are kind of surprised by the trade value, but it reminds me of like somebody asked, hey, how much is your house worth? Well, it's whatever somebody else is willing to pay for it. And right now with Baker Mayfield, I think himself, maybe his representation, and even a lot of people that were Browns fans thought that he would command maybe a second or third round pick. And he was a guy that teams would be excited to build their franchise around. But that just hasn't been the case. And I think it's a combination of up and down performance, a little bit of a low ceiling because he's not a big, strong, fast guy with a big arm that they feel like maybe they can develop him, and a guy that's been inconsistent. And so when you have a low ceiling, you've got a history of being prickly, maybe a little bit with a lot of people in the organization and outside the organization. And you've been inconsistent. And you've got, a bigger salary for maybe a guy that's going to have to come in and compete. There's not a lot of seats that are going to be available to you. So I think the two that really possibly could be on the table for Baker Mayfield would be a Seattle, where he could go in and maybe compete with Drew Lock for that starting spot. Maybe Detroit, where I don't know what they think about Jared Goff, but that type of a mentality might play pretty well with Dan Campbell. He's a little bit of an emotional guy, so maybe he likes that in his locker room with which Baker Mayfield could bring. And then maybe Carolina, but Carolina really hasn't shown any interest at this point, but they're starting to run out of options as well.
Always great to talk to you, Joe. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
That's Joe Thomas, NFL Network analyst and former All-Pro with the Cleveland Browns.